feel like embarrassing to admit I wrote this book in a day.
Pure, there's space for me to stay. Kenya can be ours to share. Believe me when I say.
And I put it to you that English as a language is really a hybrid of very many different types of influences.
18. I wrote my first novel when I was 15, got it published when I was 17.
I think it's very creative and very authentic.
I am reminded of Taban Liliong, who had at one point stated that there's a literary desert in East Africa, that nothing good can come out of East Africa in terms of creative writing.
Nature. 3 things, Ashanut, you should believe about yourself. Brilliant, beautiful, strong.
It's a great honor and privilege to be at this launch. Now, back to the question, what is African literature? I know this has been a raging debate for more than 100 years, if you like. I think it's Obiwali in the 60s who did raise the question of whether literature written in languages that are not indigenous African languages can be characterized as African literature. In fact, he did say that literature in non-African languages confronts a dead end, if I can paraphrase him. He was saying, you can't talk about African literature in Portuguese or English or French, much as you can't talk about French literature in Gikuyu, for example, or French literature in Kioruba or Kihausa. So this debate has been going on and on. My view seems to be a little bit of a departure from Obiwali, who was a forerunner in this debate, and followed by Ngugi Thiong'o, who has been arguing all along that English and other European languages are not a vehicle for carrying the African experience. On my part, I do believe what Chinua Achebe said holds a lot of truth, because Achebe says he was given the English language and he will use it. And in doing that, in fact, he goes ahead to show how English can carry the African experience. And I think it is Mugamba in this anthology of stories who introduces this controversy again in her story when she says she's now forced to use English and not her own language. And English is a thief. It steals cultures and so on and so forth. So the globalizing and cannibalizing influence of English is also brought to the fore in this anthology. So the debate goes on, but I have stated my position. I think if you look at African constitutions, even the Kenyan one, English is the official language. So English is a Kenyan language. And English can, and in fact does, carry the Kenyan and African experience. What then is important is whether the person expressing this experience has any tangible connection to Africa.
There are famous works of literature. I want to cite 2. One, The Free Trees of Thika. The other one, the African continent being a man's country, especially as an illustration, those two, of African stories written by outsiders, where they tend to give more graphic descriptions of the environment, the wildlife, the rivers and the mountains, than more detailed descriptions of the people with whom they live, they encountered, the workers, the cooks, the watchmen, the house helps. Now, how can that be?
Thank you. I think that's a very valid question. Chinwe Achebe wrote in response to what he saw as a racist and demeaning and dehumanizing depiction of Africans in Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. And that essay became something of a touchstone on how to discuss the African in the European imagination. And even the Karen, after whom a neighborhood in Nairobi is named, has also depicted the African in such a disparaging terms. And so that's why it's important to draw the boundary between what is authentic African writing. Although some can argue that in fact the search for authenticity is elusive. How do you decide and determine that this is authentic? But certainly in the literary circles, African literary circles, people take positions. And one position is that literature of that kind is typified as colonial outpost literature, which looks at the African as a child of a lesser god. In fact, a bit human, maybe subhuman, savage, barbaric. And in a sense, that is what Achebe is livid about in that very authoritative, magisterial essay. Because he's saying, why is it that the characters in Heart of Darkness, the African characters, don't speak? They only make unintelligible sounds, while the white characters are intelligent, they speak a language that is understandable. So for me, I cannot help but think about the racist underpinnings of the colonial experience in Africa, informing the kind of depictions that you would see in books like the ones you have referred to and the ones that I have also enumerated. That there's a way in which the African is seen as uncivilized and uncultured, and it's Hegel, the German philosopher, who thinks of Africa as being outside even the history of the world. So this kind of attitude, demeaning attitude, cannot be prevented from appearing in outpost colonial literature, because writing is like traveling. I don't know whether you guys think like I do. When people travel, they travel with their biases and baggage. So even those travel narratives that the Europeans have written about Africa contain the same baggage, ideological baggage that they left with when they left Europe. And so it is important that African voices, such as the whispers from the river, can be heard, because now the African is expressing his own experience in his own words, in his own voice, to counter this Afro-pessimistic view that has been given us by those who do not have a sense of the humanity of Africa.
I think, in my view, your voice and your perspective is valid as African if the people that you're writing about validate it. And it's not enough to come and say that you have something to say. Do the people that you're talking about think that you have captured their perspective?
So I often say that English is my first language, and as Ken mentioned or said, English is an African language at this point, so I speak English very fluently. I don't speak Meru, which is the language that my mother spoke. So I do claim to be Meru, but what is happening with African people all around is that for example, when you say that you're Kenyan, how does being Kenyan work with being, say, Meru? Because Kenya is a much more recent idea, and yet we know that there is a Kenyan culture that is a mix of a lot of different things. So for my part, I spend much less time trying to be whatever the ideal is. I am African.
To add on that, I think it is Abiola Urele, one of the foremost African thinkers, particularly in the literary field, who wrote an essay entitled "In Praise of Alienation." And the thrust of that essay is that you cannot underestimate the impact of the colonial experience. The African was completely transformed by the colonial experience. That, in essence, is why about a week or so ago, it was mentioned that Kenyans are the best English speakers in Africa. Because that's their identity. They strive to speak English and to write it and to articulate their thoughts and feelings and their stories, like this wonderful group of budding writers has done. I am reading these stories and I say, wow, I wish I had that kind of mastery of English. But it's this transformation that came from that devastating colonial experience. So our identity cannot be the same now like it was 100 years ago. The current African is a conflicted individual with multiple fragmented identities which have to be accepted as they are. So that's my view. You see, unlike my colleague, I speak my mother tongue. The language my mother spoke, I speak it. In fact, I think my mother tongue is easier for me than English, and then Kiswahili, for which I'm known. Actually, I operate more in Kiswahili, but my mother tongue is where I'm at home. But I have acquired aspects of culture from other parts of the world, so that I am inclined to think, like Ali Mazrui, that the African, in fact, has triple heritage. Actually, more than triple heritage, but let's just, for heuristic purposes, assume that, in fact, it is triple heritage. That we have European heritage, we have Afro-Asian heritage, and we have African heritage. So the current African is ever-changing, but is that kind of conflicted and almost unidentifiable individual. That's my view.
I'm gathering from the discussion is that identity is essentially fluid. So if we're to undergo another era of colonialism, then our very being will be transformed or transmuted with whatever culture is infringed on us. So does that mean that the idea of what an African is changes along with influence in colonialism if it is to come again?
Well, the assumption that colonialism in fact ended is a wrong assumption. Because there's such a thing as post-colonial. But this post-colonial, in fact, is not true. The world is governed by the states in their different geopolitical spaces where they have their own self-interests and they all claim sovereignty. You have some idea about the Westphalian Treaty, that we will not interfere with the affairs of another state. So mutual non-interference, almost mutual indifference to what happens in another state. Now, that is in theory. In reality, there are powerful states in the world, and they even have names for themselves: G8, G7, and so on and so forth. These ones are the prefects of the world. None of them is African. None of them is African. So, you know, in the 90s, and we are at this moment mourning the passing of the second president of Kenya, Mr. Daniel Arap Moi. During his reign in the 1990s, IMF, which is controlled by them, and World Bank, which is controlled by them, one of them has always had a leader from Europe, the other one from USA. It's a given. The head of those institutions has to be American or European. Now, they imposed on Africa SAPs, structural adjustment programs, that made so many people poor, and the situation has never been the same again during the time of Mzee Moi. Now, where is the disappearance of colonialism? So my view is that, in fact, colonialism hasn't gone away. What is happening is that we're now more and more influenced by the discoveries they make there and they impose on us. Even technological discoveries, the internet and the cell phone and all sorts of things that come, which we embrace, and we have a way of embracing them and becoming better than them at using them as consumers. But we don't discover anything. The other colonial power that now is working on us, of course, is obvious. The place where we know coronavirus has erupted. That is another way in which you're being colonized. Not to say that in a way, because South Africa is semi-African, or has been semi-African for a long time, has had, it is colonially, semi-colonial influence on most African countries.
When I was starting out as a reporter, I was taught to listen to what someone is saying, but also what they're not saying. So I had a kind of undercurrent to your question, which was, does that mean that African languages or culture or identity is so weak that it can be influenced and overthrown and infiltrated so easily? And I put it to you that English as a language is really a hybrid of very many different types of influences. So it gets its roots from Old German, right? But so much of its vocabulary is French. So much of it is influenced by Spain and also by their colonial adventures, you could say, around the world, where they picked up so many different kinds of vocabulary. So English as a language itself is already a hybrid. So for us, we shouldn't see like English is this monolithic thing that is devoid of history and a story. There's a story there. And if Africa becomes fragmented in identity or hybridizes or absorbs certain influences, then African cultures and languages are not doing anything different than other languages have done throughout the ages.
All right. Okay, we'll move on to the second topic of discussion, which is African writing and career prospects. So I would like at this point for Sean, Amy, and Ariana to all state what they intend to study at university in order to help create a foundation for this second topic.
So as I've said, I am Amy, and I am going to be studying biomedical science at university.
Hi, I am Sean, and I plan to pursue architecture at university.
Hi, I'm Ariana, and I plan to study chemical engineering.
Okay, now I would like to bring the questions back to those who are asking them and to begin this discussion on African writing and career prospects.
So, as the three of us are not necessarily aiming towards going to study literature or writing at university, what advice would you give us as people who want to continue to keep in touch with our writing, even through other careers?
I'll take this question because I actually have a degree in biomedical science. Oh. That's what I studied at university. My answer to you is that life happens. Things happen that are outside your control. Many of us, I think, in this room have grown up having all the steps marked out for us in advance, right? Your parents have basically like cleared the path, and all you need to do is walk in it. But life isn't like that. And I think that we should be open to whatever life brings our way. And you might find that even things that you hadn't planned to happen are working in your favor. And I've been able to make a life as a journalist and a writer, although this is not anything I explicitly kind of made happen. When it happened, I just kind of ran with it. So basically that's my story.
So I have a degree in economics, but I started studying writing formally from around the age of 18. I wrote my first novel when I was 15, got it published when I was 17. So writing has been a big part of my life, and when I attended an American university, so my studies were planned a bit differently from what you might have in a Kenyan university or probably even in the UK. I needed to take 32 courses to graduate, and only 10 of those had to be in economics. So I had 22 classes to do what with, and what with included French, Japanese, philosophy, creative writing, formal literature classes, history. I mean, everything that I could do or wanted to do, I was able to do. So that allowed me to continue pursuing writing even through the university. Then after I graduated from university, I went to study a master's in fine arts, creative writing. So that means I had 2 years where I was also doing formal writing training. But what happened immediately after that is that I quit writing for 5 years. I didn't write a thing. And then I won the King Prize, and I was like, oh, this thing looks interesting. Good develop. So I came back to writing, and I actually teach a creative writing course in Nairobi, a graduate level course. It runs for about 18 weeks. What I've seen with that is that I have in my class people who are in marketing, who are writers, they're writing for the newspaper, but I also have lawyers, economists, and I mean everyone. But it comes down to this: if you want to write, you write. There's no sort of formula or clever thing that I'm going to... I mean, if you want to write, you take up your pen or your laptop and you just write, and you keep writing and you keep reading. That's it.
Sean would like to make a follow-up to Amy's question.
So in appreciation of the doors that sort of African and literature and investing in literature and the writing and the reading of literature does sort of open in terms of your options looking to later stage of your life. I'd also like to pose questions into what it may look like for someone who almost exclusively explores and pursues one field that is away from literature while still being in appreciation of it, and what could the benefits of that be?
I mean, there is no reason that there should be sort of an exclusivity, because you go to work is the thing that you wake up and you go do 9 to 5. The rest of your time is your time. What you do with it is up to you. So if you want to be a writer, you can do that. A very good example is Kinyanjui Kombani. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he is a very prolific Kenyan writer, and he puts out, in a year he can put out 4 books. But Kinyanjui Kombani is a full-time banker, and he has no plans or intentions whatsoever to leave banking. So again, if you want to write, you just write.
Thank you. Am I allowed to comment?
Yes, definitely.
Yes, you can.
Because I'm hearing about only 10 units that have anything to do with economics.
Yes.
The rest is something else.
Yeah.
Now that is what I call an education. And I hope that, African institutions can embrace this kind of broad-based approach to learning. I was once on a plane that developed problems while we were going to Khartoum, so we had to return. But we could not land immediately because they said they had to eject some fuel before we can land. And so before this was communicated to us, there was a lot of heated conversation by people who sat next to me. And they were engineers. I sat there listening to these engineers before our lives looked like we're on the brink of disappearing. They were very animated in their debate. What were they debating? Engineers, Shakespeare. So you hear engineers quote Shakespeare, to be or not to be, and you feel so thrilled. This is the kind of education that we should have. This education that collapses disciplinary boundaries. That's the kind of education we need. And now talking about writing and whether it can interfere with some professional careers. Other than Kinyanjui Kombani, the list is endless of those who write, and yet they really do not have formal training in creative writing. And the writer of The Concubine, an African writer, now deceased, Elechi Amadi, was a mathematician who could write novels and short stories and poems. So it's nothing out of the blue. And then in Kenya, the late Dr. Margaret Ogola, who wrote The River and the Source, she was, what do they call those who treat children?
Pediatrician.
Yes, that's what she was. And she wrote novels. She wrote novels that were award-winning. In fact, she won the Commonwealth Prize for Literature, I think she did. So it really is no problem. It doesn't matter what you'll be doing with yourselves. If you want to be a writer, you write. And it doesn't even matter when you begin. Because Joseph Conrad, that we talked about in bad terms earlier on, learned the English language in adulthood. He was in his 40s when he moved to England and learned this language from zero. He came from Poland. And then he mastered that language and the art of writing so much that he has been classified among English writers because he was very good at it. And of course, very good at depicting Africa as a dark continent. But he was good at it. That's the whole point. So it can never be too late, and your profession can never be a hindrance to your writing if that's what you want to do.
All right, that will... now we'll have to conclude our panel and discussion time. We want to thank our 3 guest speakers so very much for coming and giving their 2 cents on the topics we discussed. So round of applause once again.
I just wanted to say that I hope you enjoyed this night because it has been very important to all of us here. For us as students, this is a very exciting and important event, as it has allowed us to express our varying yet directed feelings towards Africa. First and foremost, I would like to thank God for the opportunity and strength to tackle such a challenge. This 3-year journey has not been easy, so I want to give props to all amazing writers that put in so much effort and time into the novels and novellas that they write. You all served as inspirations to us, and we hope to inspire the youth to make positive changes within this continent. I want to thank the panel for giving up time to participate in this event. You have enlightened us and advised us greatly. To everyone who put sweat and tears into writing stories, editing the book, and making this momentous event a reality, thank you.
This event has been fantastic. I am reminded of Tabandi Lyong, who had at one point stated that there's a literally desert in East Africa, that nothing good can come out of East Africa in terms of creative writing. But I think the launch of this book, this anthology of stories by students of Turi, is indicative of the fact that, in fact, this is a season of harvest and not a literal desert, as Taban had declared many decades ago. These are young, ambitious, audacious men and women who have shown that the writing scene in this side of the world is still vibrant, and I think that we can be optimistic as we look to the future, that writing will continue as well as reading, and this is the kind of culture we want to encourage. It is absolutely heartening to witness the launch of this momentous book.
Tumultuous life experience has led me to write. I've always wanted to write ever since I was a child, and the opportunity came up in school, and it was extremely exciting for me to take it up. So I sat down and thought, and luckily enough, I didn't have any issues with coming up with a story, and it was based on the African culture and how we go abroad and we fail to come back sometimes. And I have ambitions to go to the UK to study law, and for me, I want to come back and improve our judiciary system, the backlog of 50,000 cases a year, and the amount of people that don't get enough justice, especially the working class in Kenya. So that is my aim. Today was just an amazing day to recognize how far we've come as a group, me only being a simple embodiment of the rest of the 19 people that wrote the book, hoping that this will make a difference, not only now, but in the future when we think back to what we have done. I feel like embarrassing to admit, I wrote this book in a day.
I think it's very creative and very authentic.
So I sat down in my room at the beginning because I was told you're going to be kicked out if you don't finish writing it. So I sat down and I wrote all of it, and it was extremely difficult. But the thing about being a writer is that you find that some days you don't have the strength to keep writing and you have mind blocks, but luckily that day I was able to keep going and keep writing. But when it came to the editing of the text is when it became extremely difficult to change what I had written or make it even better and become even more of a prolific writer in terms of accentuating my vocabulary and embodying the African culture.
This has been a fantastic day, especially given that my daughter was taking part in this function today. I'm very proud of her to be part of this team and what she has actually achieved from being a part of this team.